So then George Martin comes along, most famous author in the world, who hasn't written anything at this point for years, writes like four giant blog posts. Each one's like 10,000 words, talking about what a horrible barbarian I am to intrude in the sacred Hugo Awards. And George comes out and says, "Well, sure." I've written about this a lot at this point. And he said, "Sure, yeah, you may have thought that this was the award for the best thing in fandom, and may have believed that this was the award for everyone, but it's not. It's for us. It's just us, me and my friends. It's just ours. It's not yours."
Hello, friends, and welcome to Culturescape, the show that interviews the geeks that built modern nerd culture. Today, I have the honor of hosting the New York Times bestselling author, one of my favorites, Larry Correia. He is the man behind the mega hit selling series Monster Hunter. He is a lifelong nerd with deep ties to geek culture and is the man behind the astounding SAD Puppies campaign, which you may not have heard of, but it was a big deal in 2013 when it showed not only the naked bias that was at play at something as prestigious as the Hugo Awards, but was one of the first warnings of how the modern woke movement was dividing us nerds and taking over the pop culture. Thank you, Larry. I know that was a bit of a mouthful. Welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
So let's introduce yourself. What do you do for a living? And let's tell us a little bit about your background. How did you get into nerd culture and becoming a science fiction author?
Sure. Well, so I've been an author now full time for about 8, 9 years. I've been doing this for about 12 or 13. I started out self published. Then I got picked up by Banned Books, and I've been there ever since. Actually, I was a nerd from a very young age because I was a reader. I love to read. I grew up really poor in the middle of nowhere, San Joaquin Valley of California, cows and plows, and on a dairy farm. I read a lot because that didn't cost much money to go to the library. um, Grew up on all sorts of different books. Always kind of wanted to tell stories and be a writer. I wrote my first book in college, but it sucked. I went off for about 10 years after that, not writing at all because I had a career and I did other stuff. I was in the gun business is what I did. I was an accountant, and then I did various gun stuff, firearms related stuff. I was a military contractor, contract accountant to specify, nothing cool. And then I wrote my second book, Monster Hunter International, when I owned a gun store, and I self-published that and got started selling it on internet gun forums, and that blew up really huge.
Yeah, you do have a unconventional background. I mean, a lot of authors do. Um, so when you were reading those books, were there any kind of writer or there were stories that you really engaged with?
Oh, so growing up, I read every single Louis L'Amour novel. I loved westerns, so I think that still kind of comes through in the way I write. Even though I don't write westerns, I still like that kind of hero. I love those kind of hero archetypes and those kind of situations. My first exposure to fantasy was actually Terry Brooks, and then Lord of the Rings, sort of Shannara and all that stuff. Read all those, Raymond Feist, all the magician novels. I read all the Dungeons and Dragons books when I was a kid. In high school, I read all the Dragonlance and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I read many a Dragonlance book in high school too. I can relate to that.
Yeah, so that stuff all kind of stuck with me. And then many years later, when I wrote Monster Hunter, I was actually because I was in an internet gun forum. I'm a horror movie lover. I love horror movies, and we were just talking about horror movies and monster movies, and somebody made a crack about lines I'd like to hear in a horror movie someday, and it was the idea was that horror movies, B monster movies, would be over in a matter of minutes if they starred our people. And so I thought that was hilarious, and I set out to actually write that as a book, and it turned out really good and blew up. I was very, very successful as a national bestseller as a self-published book, and I got picked up by Bain, and I've been there ever since.
It's nice to see someone that had a passion for reading, and then you were eventually able to jump to the next level and start writing for yourselves. Um, so What when you started first writing, what did your loved ones or the people around you say? Did they think you were crazy for doing that, or were they supportive?
Actually, my wife was really super supportive. She uh, basically my first office was writing on a laptop bed. So I would be there with headphones in, sitting in bed at night with my wife, really late at night typing because that was the only time I could. Um, so she supported me with the weird hours and this living this weird dream, and it worked out, and I actually have my own office now and pay all the bills. It's pretty cool.
Oh, that's cool. So when you first started as a sci-fi author, you did pretty well. Monster Hunter, for example, was a New York Times best-selling book. What was that like? I mean, and what must have it felt like after putting so much effort into working on your dream and then seeing that come to fruition?
It was weird. I never really I didn't expect success. I started telling stories because I enjoy it. I love it. I'm passionate about it. It's what I do for fun anyway. I'm a compulsive storyteller. Um, the fact that I can make a really good living off this is a blessing. It's just awesome. It's actually incredible. I get to live this dream that I just make crap up all day and enjoy it and pay me money for it. I was taken by surprise. Actually, was my first book was not a New York Times bestseller. It was a bestseller, but it didn't hit the New York Times list. It wasn't until I believe my second or third book that I hit, and then I made it several times. And I don't make it anymore now that they know who I am. Even though like my sales have gone up, and I actually far better now than I did back in those days. My fan base has grown dramatically. But I'm pretty sure I'm never going to make the New York Times bestseller list again. I'm on the they have my name like on a post-it on the wall. I'm sure that says, screw this guy.
They have a wall of shame, or like you can't let any of these people ever up on the list. So
Yeah,
that
pretty
is a
sure.
good that is a good turning point. So uh, when did you okay, so you one of the unique things I like you about Larry is that you were one of the first people that really noticed some of the changes in the pop culture, the nerd culture, um, torrent. There just seemed like some things were weird, and so you noticed some of these changes. So can you get a little bit into this? What was going on when you started to notice that biases, whether they're political or cultural, started appearing, and these people started censoring themselves, and all that led up to eventually your Sad Puppies campaign?
Yeah, I was kind of an early indicator in the culture wars that I think everybody now is familiar with. But back in 2009, when I first started doing this professionally, it was getting published by Band. A lot of authors that I met, a lot of peers that I met, if they were conservative or libertarian or anything other than liberal, they kept their politics to themselves out of fear. Um, and I learned this really fast from a lot of writers. When you first become a writer, you start meeting other writers, going to events and that kind of thing. And just the talk was very much if you want to have a career, you don't want to upset Manhattan Publishing. Manhattan Publishing is overwhelmingly left wing. We're talking 99.9% left wing. If you are a conservative in that environment, they're gonna rip it apart. And I got nominated for an award for back in those days it's called the Campbell. Since then, politically correct changed it. But the Campbell Award was held at the Hugos, but it's for best new author. And my first couple books were doing really well, are very, very popular. And I got nominated for this award. And I knew within 30 minutes of the announcement being made that I was going to lose and come in last place because the action on the internet was fascinating. Nobody cared about my book. Nobody cared about what I actually wrote or how good I could write. Is that I owned a gun store when I wrote
Uh-oh.
my yeah. So I was a lot of writers, they kind of keep to themselves, keep it on the download, like that they're conservative or they were back in those days. They were anything other than liberal. When you own a machine gun store, I was a SOT Title 7 machine gun dealer. And I did all that fun stuff, and that's my background and firearms instructor and concealed weapons instructor. Um, I never had a chance to keep my politics on the down. I had a chance to be in the closet. And so right from the get-go, everybody hated my guts. And they were just like, no one was talking about my books. There was like, oh, disgusting right-wing murder, baby killer, gun nut, ew. And it was just like, wow, the hate was really interesting. So then I went to the event, the Hugo Awards, and it was held in Reno, Nevada that year. They bounce around place to place. It's in communist China next year, which is hilarious. Uh, but I went to the Reno Worldcon, and I talked to a lot of people while I was there, and it was so interesting to see all these people. And I would eat dinner with them or eat lunch with them, hanging out. And everybody who was conservative or libertarian or anything, even if they were like squishy,
Yeah.
like moderates, they were like, I'll never win an award. I don't have the right politics for it. I'll never win an award. And I started looking at it. I was like, well, what percentage of these people that win this are liberal? And I started just in my own cursory going through it. I was stunned that it was so overwhelmingly liberal. Like there were occasionally in the past people had won, but in recent years it was getting rarer and rarer and rarer than anybody the wrong politics win anything. And so I started looking at that. And I was like, okay, this is interesting. And then we had the thing and the awards, and I came in last, as expected. But one of the things was interesting was they give you this little book of stats at the end of who nominated, how many people nominated, how many people voted. And I saw how tiny this was. My whole life, I had been told that these awards were like the Oscars. This big, prestigious, fancy. This is the best of the best.
Yeah, this is it. This is top shelf stuff right here.
And the actual revelation to me was that this is decided by a tiny clique of a couple hundred people. That's it. And they're all the same. They all have the same background, the same philosophy. All the publishing people went to the same schools, the same parties. They all believe the exact same thing. Back in those days, it wasn't hating Donald Trump; it was hating George Bush. It was there weren't a lot of people who voted against Barack Obama. And I'm looking at this, and I'm thinking, well, this is crap. I've always been told that this is what's popular amongst fandom. I'm meanwhile selling way more books than anybody else I was up. And you know what? I've got a lot of fans. I've got a lot more fans than the rest of these. And so I started thinking, in the future, I think someone needs to expose this. Someone needs, because most people were like me. They're thinking, oh, these are prestigious awards, right? They're a big deal. They represent what's best fandom. No, they represent what one tiny little clique of high school mean thinks of. And fandom is everybody. Fandom is everybody who loves to read, everybody who loves sci-fi, everybody who loves fantasy. And a couple years later, my career had really blown up, and I was doing great. I was making tons of money, and I was kind of at that point uncancelable. I was at a really good publishing house, Toni Weisskopf, public fan, and she does not give a crap what her people's politics are. Toni just publishes writers, period. As long as they're good and the fans like them, Toni's cool. So I thought, what the heck? I'm going to go ahead and do a campaign, which is funny because all the liberal writers had done this forever. Liberal writers would go out and be like, "Hey, everybody, vote for me," and for what?
Yeah, so play the game. Yeah,
they played the game. So I decided to do the same thing, but I basically, you heard the trope, hang a lampshade on it, be really obvious what you're doing. I went so over the top, ham-fisted that we used the Sarah McLachlan "In the Arms of an Angel" commercials.
yeah. For our younger viewers, Sarah McLachlan was this actress. I think she was on Three's Company, maybe. I don't remember.
She was a musician.
Yeah, she's a musician, right? And then they would she would cover like animal abuse charities, and they would be so over the top. The commercial,
yeah,
they'd have these really sappy music, and
the commercials were just designed to rip your heart out because it was like sad puppies, and it was like they show these dogs that were all sad, and for how only a tiny donation you could improve the lives of these dogs. And so I did the same thing, only it was the reason puppies were sad was because the Hugo Awards were so biased in favor of liberal writers. I even did cartoons. In fact, my spokesman, believe it or not, it was a cartoon manatee named Wendell. So I had Wendell the Manatee. That's how serious I took this, right? And so that was the first year I did this, and it worked. It actually got me on there, and I knew I was going to lose again, but it was hilarious.
The strategy here wasn't necessarily to win awards, but it was forced to get more people nominated who might deserve it, or just for fun, a little bit of trolling.
It was definitely trolling. And then the funny thing was, it kind of grew from there. So the next year, because I had shown all these other writers that the system is rigged. Basically, the whole entire system is rigged, just rigged in front of a bunch of people. And it wasn't even as much at the time politics as much as it was a bunch of people who were insular Manhattanites that all had the exact same politics, and they hated everybody who was an outsider.
Yeah, and if I may interject, I was going through some of your old campaign stuff. A major problem that you guys had wasn't even necessarily politics. It was that people who were undeserving were getting it, or people who had published work, and it was like it had like the thinnest slice of being in the sci-fi genre. They were basically romances or young adult fiction or whatever, but they weren't really sci-fi. They just had some random element, and then they would get pushed in and be like, "Look at this amazing book," and then people that actually like science fiction are like, "What is this? What is this tribe?"
It was funny because like they would attack my nominees as like, "Oh, your nominees aren't worthy," and I would just like have this giant list of previous nominees that were just utter crap. But they were created by friends of cliques. Like, so if you were a friend of the clique, do no wrong, you could produce utter crap and they'll get you in. And some truly garbage works had won. Like, but why did they win? Identity of the author. And that was it was all identity. Now, part of this too is the other side, because once again, this is proto-culture war. So everybody now realizes that when you upset a liberal apple cart, they're going to attack you that you're sexist, racist, misogynistic, homophobic, whatever. They're gonna attack because that's what they do. That's all they do. So when we put together in the next year, we put together our nominees, and basically what I was looking for, me and Brad Torgerson and Sarah Hoyt, this together. We went through and we were looking for authors that were good quality authors who were normally passed over or just disregarded by these cliques. We didn't have any litmus tests. We didn't say vote for these people because of politics. We said vote for these people because they're awesome. They're good writers, quality, but they're not popular with cliques. But they were popular with fans. Everybody we nominated was popular with fans. That's because remember they have categories for short fiction and novellas and novelettes and different science fiction. So we put together the dreaded slate, which we'll come back to in a second here. So we put together a big list of those people. We had no political litmus test. We didn't care about gender. We didn't care about, what your sexuality was or who you slept with or what your religion was. No one cared. We just cared if they're
as it should be.
Yeah, which is exactly how it should. And so we put this up and we won. We dominated the awards. And so we were all at the nominations because, once again, it was a tiny clique of a few hundred people. I have thousands and thousands of fans. All I had to do was get a small percentage of my fans engaged enough to go join this organization and vote. So we just did. We voted. And they're all fans. They're all voters. So we get in there, and as soon before the awards were announced, because remember, this is all supposed to be secret, yet somehow, before the awards were announced, a reporter from The Guardian runs a report about me. The Guardian is a British newspaper, communist rag. It's never said a word about me ever. And all of a sudden, a couple days before this, because it's clear it leaked, he runs this article about what a horrible, awful, bad, evil person I am. And I was like, okay. And then the awards come out, and immediately we got slammed in the media. It was almost, I have no evidence. It looks very clearly like somebody did a press release to all these different media organizations, because it was all organizations like IO9, Gawker type stuff, Entertainment Weekly, all these different ones ran all these articles that were like exactly the same. And they all did it within it was like 16 publications, and they all did it within a 24-hour period. And it was all places that had never gave a crap about, that never mentioned the Hugo Awards ever.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, they all ran the same story. And the narrative was a group of straight white males, which right off the bat, that wasn't true of the organization, had run a campaign to keep women and minorities out of publishing. And because we were sexist, racist, misogynistic, homophobes, and we were against diversity in publishing. That was the narrative, and this was so bizarre. And I actually threatened to sue Entertainment Weekly, and I lawyered up, and I actually got them. They put a retraction. It was funny because they had their headline, but then immediately under the headline was, "Well, we said there are straight white males except for the following," and then they got a list. Which was the hilarious part was we actually were way more diverse than the regular Hugo Award. Because once again, we didn't have any. We had various religions. We had people that I didn't know anything about their personal life at all. And I'd have an author be like, "Well, you nominated me. I'm gay." I'm like, "You're gay?" I didn't even know. And they're telling us all this stuff. And I mean, it was just hilarious because we had all this stuff. The year before, the winners had been of the 14 winners or 16, I think it was 16 winners, 15 of them were white liberals, and the media hailed that as a huge win for diversity. So it was like, okay, so we actually had a real diverse slate get in there, and boy, they lost their friggin' mind. But the truth doesn't matter, because we saw later as culture war evolved, it is all about narrative. It's not about reality.
Yep.
So it didn't matter that we could say, well, look, one of our founders, one of the three of us running this thing. Brad's a straight white male, who's been in a interracial marriage for 20 years and has biracial children. I'm Portuguese. My dad was darker than Barack Obama. I mean, just genetically, I'm not white. Sarah Hoyt is, if anybody noticed, was a female. And so they get all this, and they tell us that we're like this group of straight white males doing all this, and our nominees were like the Rainbow Coalition. But it didn't matter. They just ran with the narrative that that's what we were. And here I am, years and years later, and I hear the same thing from the same useful idiots. Because once they pick a narrative, they just run with it forever, regardless of reality. They just get the narrative out there fast and push it. And the truth comes out later. They ignore it.
Yeah, they don't care. By the time the truth comes out, it's often years later, and only the people who might have been initially impacted even care about that. So it's like the damage is already done, and there's very little blowback on them.
See, this actually worked okay for me, though, because my goal, I never went into this expecting to win anything. My goal was to expose just how shallow, petty, and rigged this was. And what happened from that point on is it blew up like crazy. It went everywhere. Everybody was talking about it. Like I said, it was proto-battle of the culture war. This predates Gamergate was the next kind of battle that came along in the culture war. All of a sudden, all these people who had been conservative or libertarian and fandom were like, wait a minute. These guys aren't weirdo outsiders. They're me. They're me and my people and what I enjoy reading. And the crazier the slander got, and the more outlandish the slander got, the more obvious it got to the audience how rigged it was. And then when they rolled around to the actual awards, they did everything impossible. They changed the rules. 2,000 mystery voters showed up and voted in perfect lockstep, so that every one of us got no awarded. I actually, it's funny. One of the narratives was Larry Correia did this just because he wanted to win an award so bad. Ironically, I got nominated, because I was on there. I withdrew my nomination. I took mine off. Specifically, I had mine removed, so I couldn't. I did that on purpose because it's hilarious. Because once again, the narrative was like, "Oh, this was just personal, doing this." Like, no, I'm not on there. I did this to screw with you guys because you're such scumbags. I wanted the world to see what scumbags you are. And as this went on and on, they then it was called no award. They basically blocked everybody. And it's interesting because some of the nominees that I put up were unquestionably quality and qualified. We had Mike Resnick was one of the people. Mike Resnick is a legend in the science fiction world.
Yes, he's still very big.
Yeah, I mean, he passed away. Good man. Tony, but they no awarded Mike Resnick.
No,
Tony
no, but I mean,
Weisskopf.
his books. I mean, his books are still on when people are like, how
Oh,
should I get into sci-fi? His books are almost always on the top 10 list.
yeah, and for like 5 decades, 40 plus years, hundreds of books. And then we nominated Tony Weisskopf for best editor. And Tony Weisskopf is a legend publishing. She has been an editor for decades. She's amazing. She's talented. She's edited dozens of bestsellers, if not hundreds. She's phenomenal, and she has done all this stuff. And as far as the diversity people who are all screaming about her, she's a she's a Jewish single mom, and they're they're they no awarded her. She's probably the most deserving person that's ever been nominated for that award in the last 20 years. Previous to this, the same gaggle of doofuses from the same publishing house take turns winning over and over and over, you know? And that was perfectly fine. But us outsiders came in. They're just trash. They're trash people. And their whole narrative was like, we were unsafe. By our people being there, by conservatives and libertarians being there, racist, sexist, hate mongers, we made them unsafe. So
Yeah,
to show you,
weaponizing the feelings thing. And by the way, like you said, this is happening before Gamergate,
yep,
before Trump, before all of it. This is like the first time, I think, at least for me at the time I was in graduate school, the first time I was noticing this kind of thing happening. It was like, what? Because previous to that, for me at least, when in the communities I was interested in, the nerd topic I was interested, like say, deep Doctor Who fans, politics never came up. They never had these kind of conversations. And it was around just a little after you were doing this that we started seeing that kind of thing, where people were talking about feeling unsafe, having another type of fan there. Whereas previously, no one cared. Literally, it never came up. No one cared
nope.
about your politics. It just wasn't one of those factors you thought about when you were going to your friends for the D&D game night.
Yeah, it was like weaponized empathy, where they would like try to hold you hostage on that. They would make crap up and then demand that everybody else comply to their feelings. At the time, it felt pretty lonely at the time when I first started doing this because most of the world was not aware of this. Became, I mean, it was already everywhere back then, and it was pervading every industry in academia, comic books, video games, publishing, movies, TV. Every institution of society, this is pervasive behavior. The whole social justice movement was just like Elon Musk was talking about woke the other day. Was it's an excuse? It's like an excuse to be righteous yet be a bully. That's just all it was. And so as we're doing
Exactly.
this, it was really interesting. So when I started out doing this, we were kind of like I was kind of like a weirdo voice in the wilderness where nobody was really listening to me. And within a few years, a greater portion of society had been exposed to this, probably by being attacked themselves. And now we've got so then we went, Gamergate was another big one that woke a lot of people up. Millions of gamers woke up to that. And then the Trump years, we saw this like totally just take off huge. And by this point in time now, I don't think there's anybody in America who's not completely willfully ignorant, not aware of the whole woke, cancerous behavior of thought terminating cliches and emotional manipulation.
I agree. I think even if people don't want to use the terminology, maybe they don't like the word woke, or even if they're mostly ignorant most times, when they go to the Star Wars, they see Last Jedi and they're like, they see Mark Hamill, milking the teats off the space manatee or whatever the heck that was about. Or they see things like Rings of Power, and they may not have the vocabulary like to say what is going on, but they know something's up. There's just like, this used to be good, and now it's just kind of making me feel either bored or angry. So I
Yep.
agree. I think I wanted to point out a lot of people when they bring up your name talk about the Sad Puppies campaign, especially if they're more of my friends on the left. They say it was a failure because you did do the Sad Puppies campaign, and then you had subsequent versions playing on that theme.
Yeah. Well, because we had offshoots. Well, it's interesting. So if you look at like what the initial goals, and it wasn't like I was transparent the whole time. Like I said, I did cartoons for this. It was pretty transparent. I wanted to expose them. So so the different goals of the different people involved. I wanted to expose the Hugo Awards for what they were. I wanted to expose the social justice warriors for being awful and trying basically destroying our industry and ruining fun and ruining reading. So my goal was to expose. I won. I was happy. 3 years in, I bailed. I was like, everything I wanted to accomplish, I'd accomplished. And in fact, my crowning victory, the reason I think I won, and it comes down to one exchange. That was, and I'll get to the other people here in a second because like they had different goals. But George Martin, George R. R. Martin, most at the time most famous author in the world. At the height of Game of Thrones was huge mega hit on HBO. George Martin's part of this cadre, or was. He is no longer one of the cool kids because he got devoured in the cannibal feeding frenzy a few years later by the woke. But what happened there was all of a sudden, here I am, just Larry Correia, some schlub they'd been dismissing as this nobody. And at the time, the narrative was like, oh, Larry's a liar. There's no bias. We're not biased at all. This one organization set out to prove what a liar I was as this blogger. And he got like the last 200 winners in all the different categories. And he went through in every single one that he could find out what their political leanings were through their own statements or how they identified themselves. And of those, I want to say it's 200. I think he was like 186 or something were liberal. And only the last handful were something other than liberal. And so this guy who set out to disprove me was like, no, he's got a point. So then George Martin comes along, most famous author in the world, who hasn't written anything at this point for years, writes like 4 giant blog posts, each one's like 10,000 words, talking about what a horrible barbarian I am to intrude in the sacred Hugo Awards. And George comes out and says, well, sure, I've written about this a lot at this point. And he said, sure, yeah, you may have thought that this was the award for the best thing in fandom, and you may have believed that this was the award for everyone, but it's not. It's for us. It's just us, me and my friends. It's just ours. It's not yours. And I wound up getting into this giant public debate back and forth with George Martin. I mean, it got reported on in major newspapers, which I'll tell you about in a second. That's hilarious how it was reported. But George came out and admitted every single thing that I had been alleging. Because I said it was unfair. I said it was biased. I said it was not about what was good. I said it was about what was politically correct and what was popular with this tiny little clique of inbred circle jerk. And George was like, yeah, but that's ours. It's ours. It's not yours. It's not for outsiders. It's not for all of fandom. It's just for us. And I was like, sweet, thank you. Now, when this exchange got reported on, I want to say it was New York Times or Boston Globe, talked about the debate between me and George Martin. They to how they frame it is they referred to me as best-selling author Larry Correia, and how they introduced George Martin was George R. R. Martin, son of a longshoreman.
What?
So, a guy who got George was nominated for best new author when I was like he was up for the Campbell Award, the same one that started off with me that I was up for a couple years or back in 2010 or whatever it was or 11. George Martin was nominated that for like 1976 or something. So he's been doing this since I was an infant, right? And he's worth like $1 billion and has an HBO show. Newspaper introduces him as son of a longshoreman, and I'm a best-selling author. And I was like, whoa, wait a minute. How come I'm not son of a Portuguese dairy farmer?
That is interesting.
Yeah, it's all about framing. It's all about punching down. So I was punching down against George Martin, which I thought was hilarious. Dude's worth $1 billion. I mean, come on, man.
George, unfortunately, would kind of have to eat those words because the George R. R. Martin of 2010 in that era, and the George R. R. Martin of today is a different person. I think largely because he was just the next face on the wall, or however they put that phrase.
One of the things I predicted was that the bullies, the cry bullies, have to have somebody to attack. They got to have a villain. It's kind of like communist regimes always have to have an enemy, or it's like Manuel Goldstein. You've always got to have a bad. And so once they kicked me and my friends out, Once they had all the wrong people, the wrong politics thrown out, and we all bailed, we left. Then they had no one to eat but each other. And so if you see in the years since, it's just been this increasingly awful spiral of purity tests. And so George Martin, his sin was he got up, they asked him to be one of the announcers of the awards, and he mispronounced people's names, and that made him racist and sexist.
Yeah.
And then, like, it was so bad. And so they just turned on him and ate him. And I was like, told you so. I was like, welcome to the party, dude.
Did you think what you did worked? And you would
Oh,
say
yeah.
for your own motivations, yes. And I would say, in general, I would say yes too, because although people maybe thought this was about sales, or you're trying to juice, today they'd be like, you're trying to juice your social media and get it better ad sponsor, whatever. But you look at what's happened to the Hugo since. I don't think putting a Hugo Award on Hugo Award winner on a book even means it.
No, it doesn't. And
It's
that wasn't
not
me that killed it.
applicable.
They were killing it before I came along because the winners were getting worse and worse. And one of the things that set me off was I'd be looking at my fans on the internet talk about books, and they talk about like the previous winners and how in the olden days they'd see Hugo Award winner and it was somebody like Dan Simmons or Robert Heinlein or whatever, and they would pick it up and it'd be amazing. And the more recent ones were just like, whatever, just garbage, and it's just PC nonsense. So they were declining before I ever came along. I just kind of ripped the Band-Aid off and showed the world how bad it was. And then to spite me, this is the funny part. To spite me, they've like basically cut their face off, and that within the spirals of purity tests and the only thing that matters now is popularity amongst the cliques and diversity, where they would just give the awards to whoever was the most appropriate one. It was funny because I watched authors that I liked, guys I liked, and I would see them come into this world, and not conservative. These are people who are liberal, but they'd be some group. They would belong to some demographic that was like the hotness, right? For diverse people, they'd get this author, and they would nominate them for every award in the universe, regardless of what their skill level was, like, or what their sales were. And they would get this poor author and they build them up, build them up, build them up, building them up, and they'd be the hotness for a year or two, and then they would just drop them, and they'd go to the next new thing. They would talk about diversity, but they would just use people. And I've got a couple friends now. There's some of these publishing houses still that are the same kind of thing, and they don't admit that they're friends with me in public because I would get them in trouble. But I talked to them and it's like, hey man, they're just using me because I'm demographic X, and it sucks. It's bull. And
It is. It is. I agree. You see that pretty much in all publishing media. So comics, of course, like comics is also very similar. Well, they will hire these not quite randos, but close to randos, and they have a number of checks on the category of diversity, and then they'll pump them for lots of books for a year or two, and then they'll kind of just they might keep them around, but they're not giving very much to work with, and they kind of dwindle. And you're right. It's not only is it it's immoral to try to sell stories that aren't very good, or sell what isn't your better stuff to your audience. I don't know if immoral is quite the right, but from a
well,
creative stance, it is. But
it really
it's
screws over the writer too because they don't
yeah,
have a chance if they're being held up as the greatest things in sliced bread, but they're not there yet. They're still new, but they got hoisted to this like super high level because they are a demographic that a bunch of Manhattanite publishing people want to be able to brag about it at parties. Like, hey, I have a such and such, and I have a such and such. Good. And they put the book out there, but then it goes out in the world. And the only thing that makes or breaks you as a writer is whether people like the book. And so if this stuff goes out there that's not ready and people read it and it's not that good, then they just move on. And then that person's career gets artificially stunted. Or if they had like a normal release, built up a fan base organically, like most of us do, it's totally different. The one that really makes me, I mean, I don't want to name any names. I don't want to bag on any other authors because
that's
I
fair.
can't blame anybody who, if they're offered that golden thing, they don't go for it. You know what I mean? And my advice to some of these guys that reached out to me is if you're offered a publishing contract and it's because they're going to capitalize on your diversity, whether you're a transsexual or gay or whatever, take it and run. Take it and run and use that time to write the best book you can, make as much money as you can, and get as many loyal fans as you can before they get tired of dropping. And I've seen this too, where they've hired guys for like a minority group, and they're going to promote him, going to promote him, going to promote him, and they're like, he's just a man from a minority group. That minority group it's voting Republican more now, so we're not going to care about you. The new hotness is we now need someone who is a gay, non-binary, whatever. That's the new hotness. And so they'll just drop you. It has nothing to do with where you are as an artist or how good your fan base is. They will literally decide how much marketing money to spend on you based upon what's the hot diversity I can brag about at a dinner party this week in Manhattan. It's the dumbest, lamest, stupidest thing ever. It screws over everybody. It screws over the artists. It screws over the creators. And it's just become more blatant as time has gone on. But like I said, any author who finds yourself in that position and they're offering you that publishing contract for a couple books, take the money and run. They're going to screw you. It's a heartless industry. I don't know. It's tragic.
It is tragic, and no one, it's not fun to be part of a market, or to be, there are no shortcuts. Basically, I guess that's a recurring theme of life. There are no shortcuts to professional success, really, either. So following the stuff with the SAD Puppies, you continue to write. You're someone that's pretty vocal in more right-wing the nerd community. What have you seen change since SAD Puppies and what we're seeing today? Not just negatives, but what are the positive things?
Actually, I'm super positive. I'm an optimist anyway. On the culture war front, like I said, years ago, I felt really low. For a while there, I was kind of like a voice I was like this one dude out there getting the arrows shot at me. And then I had a few friends join me and they got ripped apart. And then I had people throw me under the bus who I thought were friends, but like they couldn't put up with the social pressure. And so for a few years there, it was really lonely. But what's happened, and over time, especially after the Trump years, it went nuts, and the other side pushed so far, so fast, so hard that it got to the point that even the squishiest moderates and the most normie of normals could not deny the stuff that I've been saying for years. And I know all these writers that were like keeping it on the down low, and they're not anymore. There's more and more writers that they're open and they're outward. A lot of them are independent writers. They're not going through the traditional Manhattan publishing houses. And that was another thing too. Back in the olden days, traditional Manhattan publishing served as gatekeepers, and they were the only game in town, and so they could just shut you out if they didn't like it. This happened all the time. Once independent publishing came along, when people put their own books out there and sell them online, it changed everything. So now here I am, a decade later, and there are so many writers that are open and talk about the politics. I go to writing events and I used to be like the one weirdo, like be open about like, hey, I'm a gun nut. Back in those days, I voted for George Bush, and back in those days, and I'd be the one dude who'd admit that. Now,
and it'd be like,
it's like,
how could you?
No, it's like, how dare you? And now it's like, I am not alone. There's hundreds and hundreds of us. And it's funny because I've seen the same thing in video games. Well, not so much video games, more independent video games. Big corporate video games are still, guys there keep it on the down low. They have, I know I got a lot of friends in game. They have to keep it on the down low. But in comic books, been huge. Gaming, tabletop and role-playing game is another one too, that the woke have gone so far, so fast, pushed so hard that it's really woken a lot of people up this. But I'm not alone anymore. Like I look around and I see all these independent creators that are building another thing. Like I was looking at like I've been on various shows with other creatives. I was on Ethan Van Sciver's show, and that's one where comic book guys have come up and they're doing their own thing. Guys like Chuck Dixon doing their own thing. Eric July just made millions of dollars. And what's happening is all these traditional gatekeeping corporations that have that all follow the same monoculture. People are sick of them, and they're going around them. They're going around the gates and doing their own thing. And as long as we can reach our audience, we can make money doing it. It's wonderful.
Eric July is interesting because he doesn't have any writing or comics experience. So some of my friends are like, well, why is he in the business doing comics then? Or why are people just, they don't really know quality and content? And my response to that is one, maybe they don't because there hasn't been much in quality content as of late to educate people to have appreciation. But also it shows like think about all these people starving for a decent comic and that they see this as an opportunity.
Yep.
And it's just like the number of people who want to engage in quality media is far above and beyond than I think we realize. Like you
Yeah.
look at the numbers for like House the Dragon on HBO, which by the way is put together by George R. Martin, who he did the news show, had to get HBO to promise that he would pick the showrunners. So he wouldn't run into the problems he had with the finale last time. The numbers it pulls in versus a show that has like $1 billion for its season, Rings of Power. It just shows to me that look, whatever marketing, whatever the news media is saying, what reality is matters, and people watch things that are good. They list the things that are good. They're interested in things that are good. And even though people are still, for many people, especially more on the left or mainstream, media, are afraid to say it, the reality is even they often have to admit that what they're doing with the new woke stuff like Doctor Who with Chibnall and Jodie Whittaker is just a bit. I've found even some of these people I know who are cultural writers, they privately admit to me, yeah, it kind of sucks.
Well, if it's fascinating. It's across the board, every industry. Compare like Top Gun to all the other movies that came out, or compare like the most recent Spider-Man versus some of the other superhero movies that came out. So like woke superhero movie that like even if this movie wasn't that woke, but if the advertising beforehand was, or the messaging around it was, well, if you don't watch this, you're a sexist, that kind of thing.
Yep.
Those movies all fail. They all flop. They all terrible. They all underperform. The Spider-Man comes along and kicks butt because everything it promised was like, this is just going to be fun. And it does great. Top Gun comes along and explodes and makes insane amounts of money. Top Gun makes absurd amounts of money. And why? Because people watched it in the first week and they're like, wow, there's no preachiness here. There's no message. It's just there's no you're a bad person for watching this. You should feel guilty. It's just fun. We're going to take jet fighters, cool stuff. That was it. And it's made tons and tons of money. And we see that like across the board. I think I wrote an article last year or earlier this year called something about to the effect reach peak woke.
Mm-hmm.
I really think we have. I think we're on the downslope. Don't get me wrong. It's going to take it took a decade. It took decades to get here. It's going to take time to get out of it. But I think culturally, American society said, nah, we're done. This is this far, no further. And I think we're seeing the pendulum swing back.
I agree. I think when you made that insight, that was correct. I think I've seen that even in the culture sphere. You are seeing they're still coming, but you are seeing less and less articles that say X fans are racist, that they don't like it, or you're seeing more people who are just like Rings of Power. It first comes out, everyone has to praise it. By the third episode, though, even places like Mary Sue, comicbook.com, CVR, all of them are actually saying, actually, this sucks. It's terrible. It's awful. You're right, because I think that whether the writers still believe in that stuff or not, the editors and the publishers understand there's no appetite for it anymore. And we're sick of it. We're all just so tired. Like there's all this inflation. People are struggling to make a living. We just do not have time to be chewed out because we didn't like, the superhero.
Yeah.
I got more important stuff going on. Sorry.
Well, you look at like TV shows like Reacher or Terminal List. They're unabashed. They are what they are. They're not message fiction either. They just are going out there and it's like a manly dude killing bad people. It's like a throwback to like the stuff we grew up on, and huge successes, massive success. And it's interesting because you talk about like the inflation and stuff, because a lot of this stuff is it's luxury beliefs. It's virtuous. It's people virtue signaling their luxury. And it's like, well, I have time for all this frivolity. I am luxurious. I am higher than you. And it's like, and it goes back to the bullying thing, pushing people around thing while pretending to be righteous. And people are sick of it. They have shot their wad. Everybody knows what the game is now. We're all onto the scam. Several years ago, I got kicked out of a convention, Origins, the Game Con. I was guest of honor, and I got booted. And the reason I got booted is a angry mob showed up as soon as they announced I was guest of honor. An angry mob showed up talking about my right wing hate mongering and how they didn't feel safe. And within 30 minutes, the convention caved and threw me out. Fast forward a couple years, and I've been guest of honor at like several other conventions, big and small. And each time the angry mob has showed up to throw a temper tantrum to get me thrown out, those cons have said, no, go away. We've already made our decision. If you don't like it, well, that's too bad. Hope to see you next year. And it's funny because a few years ago, those same places, might have caved. It was really interesting though, because see, they would do this same tactic, but as people caught on to their tactic, the tactic lost all its power. Meanwhile, our side's over here just being honest. There is no tactic. We're just saying this is what it is. We don't have to do the emotional relation. And so as the audience watches this, they can see how it's going. And once you hit a critical mass of people who, what was it? The guy, Matt Walsh. Matt Walsh the other day, they did a thing, where he did from Daily Wire, where they did they tried to cancel him again, and he did his little answer to them. And one of the things it was pretty funny, but one of the things he says, you have to be canceled, you have to consent to cancel. And I think there's a lot of wisdom to that, because I'm a guy, they've tried to cancel me for forever. They've tried and tried. They've organized boycotts. They've gotten kicked out of events. They've got banned from things. Every time I go anywhere, there's always an angry bunch of people trying to do whatever. I've had bookstore employees brag about throwing my books away. Bookstores, they're dumb enough to do that, which is, I'm sure they're a great employee of that Barnes and Noble. But the thing is, I'm still here, and I'm still selling books. I never consented to be canceled. All these other authors I know who are when the cancel mob comes for them and they quail and they apologize and they beg for mercy, they're all gone. Their careers are all in the toilet. You as long as you don't consent to their bullcrap, they have no power. I mean, they can hurt you. They can take sales away. They can slander you and libel you and insult you. But as long as you're honest with your fans, you're going to keep selling and you're going to stick around.
I agree. So here's a good question for you. So people say, okay, so we're winning at least the marginal fights, or we're doing well in the indie scene for a lot of things. How do we win, though? Is there a possible way we will win back some of these bigger franchises like Star Wars, Doctor Who, Star Trek, some of these things where it feels like they've been totally taken over? Are they just unsalvageable? Is that it? Are we going to have to wait 30 years until no one cares about them anymore and then pick them up? Or is there a way people can turn the tide on that? Do you know anything in those organizations? Maybe there are people that care and want to do better. I'm interested to hear your insight on that.
Now, this is more a theory than an insight. I don't really have a lot of contacts at some. I have some contacts at a couple IPs, but not anything super major. My theory on this is that because I used to be in the corporate world, I used to be an auditor in the corporate world. The corporate world is slow. It's responsive and quick on some things, and it will capitalize on trends, but it's not good at that. It's not really good at understanding people, because it's always seen through a lens of meetings and quorums of people. Whereas fast responsive stuff, usually you have one visionary. So my theory on these big mega corporations, big entertainment mega corporations, Disney primarily, is the one that holds most of the IPs we're talking about here.
Yeah, seriously, they own almost everything.
They
Not quite yet.
It's ridiculous. What I think will happen is they're going to get their clocks clean for X number of years. I don't know how long it's going to take for them to really catch up. Because like I said, when you have a ponderous corporate giant like that, they don't turn on a dime. And you got entrenched people in the bureaucracy there. It's like a federal government. We can elect a new federal government, but it's really the employees of the federal bureaucracies that determine the direction. And I think the woke corporations are the same thing. As they're losing money, people are going to come in and they're going to start making hard decisions. And I think we're starting to see that already. If you look at like DC canceling Batgirl just here recently, and the big hoopla about that. And I don't know a lot about that. What I've seen, it looks like they were tired of hemorrhaging money, and they brought in a guy to just go through and take heads and cut losses. And it's funny. So I think we're seeing that there, but I think that's the beginning. I don't know how long this will take. So I don't think those things are lost forever. And I do think there's a lot of really brilliant, creative people who still love those properties, love to work on them. But I think what it's going to take is they're going to have to, the corporations are going to have to say, we're tired of losing money and start, cleaning house. Are some of these salvageable? I don't know. Some of these might be too far gone. It depends. I don't know. I can't. I have no idea. It'll just how this will shake out. I don't know. In the meantime, independent people and people who are actually artistic and creative are going to continue profiting. And a lot of these things. Remember, the bigger a system is, the longer it takes the system to fall just off of inertia. It's kind of like when a giant building falls. It takes a while, and we're seeing this it's like the Soviet Union didn't collapse overnight. It took the Soviet Union years of decay and corruption and falling apart before it kind of cascaded total oblivion. And we'll see the same thing at these places because they are right now disrespecting customers. And it's not just the creativity, or it's not just like on making inferior, crappy products like terrible Star Wars movies. It's stuff like getting involved in Florida politics. Parents saying, "Hey, we don't want our 6 or 8-year-old being taught about sex change operations," and Disney getting involved and saying, "No, that's hate speech." Shut up, Disney.
No, and and I think this is like a theme, I think, generally with a lot of your work and even the SAD Puppies campaign. People make the mistake sometimes of thinking that anti-woke means that you're just kind of doing what the woke is, but in the other direction. So you're very political, you're using all your levers, trying to push your own ideas through at the cost of quality. But that's not what most people are asking.
Nope.
They are instead asking just to return to basic. And with Florida is similar. The parents weren't saying that they were against gay people getting married. They just said, we don't want our young kids who are in elementary school to deal with that. We don't think it is age appropriate. Maybe some of them were more conservative and want like at all. But for most people, it was a deal like, look, that we just don't think that's appropriate. And for Disney, the family company, to not understand that was like, that is hilarious. Like such a breathtaking statement of how disjointed that company has come from its audience space.
Well, and I own stock in Disney way back when, and I remember just watching it, just like on my phone, just watching it. And as here as I am, like personally losing money, and it was still worth it. It was still hilarious. But it's actually this brings one thing full circle. So I remember talking about years ago when I first did SAD Puppies. What did they immediately attack me as? You hate women and want to keep women out of publishing, even though half my nominees are women. These parents, fast forward to this year, these parents got attacked as you hate gay people. It's the same thing. When you have no argument, when you have no real debate, when you have no quality to your thought, you just go right to you are some sort of ist or ism. You're some sort of phobe, and they go with that instead. And so when they do that, that tells you what you're dealing with. It's very transparent now to the whole world, and it's kind of awesome that way everybody sees it now.
Yeah, I agree. I think there are a lot of positives, and I'm happy for them. And I think in the long term, I think it will run out because I think humans like good storytelling better than mediocre to bad storytelling.
Yeah.
And the media diet people. I mean, just the amount of time people put in their entertainment media. So it has, in my mind, just on that alone, it could change, but I don't know. So let me, we have some time here left with you. I'd like to ask you a little bit about what projects you're working on, what influences you when you write, what inspires you, where do you get your ideas from? Now, my uncle who introduced me to you, and he's a humongous fan of your work. He has told me for years that he thinks that you're a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, like my family, because you have little nods in your books.
Yeah,
Is that true? Are you
I am. Yeah,
LDS Mormon?
I am. Yeah, I am. I am. I am. I am. Uh, I do actually have a lot of. I get a lot of Mormon characters into what I write. I'm never like slapping people upside the head with it, but I do have a lot of Mormon characters in various books. Yeah, no, those are my people.
That's fascinating. So how does that affect your writing? Does your faith or does your personal beliefs, how do those translate into what you write in your books?
Well, it's kind of fun because I'm a man of faith. I'm a religious guy. I'm a family guy. I've got a wife and children. We're pretty normal, lifestyle. And my most important thing in my life that I've ever done is be a good dad. That's my greatest. None of my books and stuff really matter. None of this other stuff matters except the fact I've got awesome kids. I've raised 4 awesome children. That's like the best thing I've done in my life. I think how it influences me in my writing. Like I said, I never wanted to be like a Mormon writer, but I'm a
Hmm.
writer who's Mormon. And so I guess, yeah, there's probably themes and beliefs and stuff that come through. I mean, don't get me wrong, I read a lot of characters who aren't, and I can do it really convincingly. I can write
Yes,
pretty
that is
much
true.
everything. Uh but overall, I do have some basic fundamental beliefs in like I try to write about good guys. I try to write about heroes. I like good triumphing over evil. I mean, don't get me wrong, my books get dark, and I am a profane individual. I swear a lot, and my books are very violent. But I believe in heroism. I believe in those old fashioned ideals. Um, I guess one thing that makes me weird is I don't hate America. I love America. I love the founding principles of America. I love the Constitution. I love the idea. I love the principles of liberty and self determination. And so you see that a lot in my books. If I have totalitarians or statists in my book, they're almost always the bad guys. They're the opponents. So that is my nature. I've gotten yelled at a lot by. Uh, he shows the government is incompetent, and
Shocker.
shocker. I used to be a military contractor. Believe me, that is not a stretch. That is not a. That is not a. It's funny because I like in Monster Hunter, I have government agency is often corrupt or incompetent, or it's competent but very ham-fisted and merciless. And I had people who were like, "Well, that just shows that he's anti-government," whereas everybody I know who works for the government loves it because they're like, "Yeah, that's pretty accurate. That's that's pretty spot on." Um, I don't know. So personal beliefs, yeah, they definitely come through in the writing, but I also try not to like overdo it. I try to be nuanced, and basically every book, every character has their beliefs, and so I'm trying to write that character's belief. They're going to do what they're going to do. As far as what I'm working on now, oh my gosh, I'm working on the 4th book in the Saga of the Forgotten Warrior. I'm almost done with that. It comes out in April, and it's called Tower of Silence. That's my epic fantasy series. I love that one. My next book that's coming out is actually it's done. It just went legal review because it's nonfiction. It's my first nonfiction book. It's called In Defense of the Second Amendment. That comes out in January. It's a book about gun rights.
That will be interesting.
I'm
That is a change of pace for you. So that will be an interesting thing to read.
It's actually already shaping up to be a major bestseller just off of pre-orders. Pre-order numbers have been nuts. So I'm very excited for that. And then I've got another book coming out next year, probably October, I believe October, November. It's called Monster Hunter Memoirs Fever. It's the next Monster Hunter novel. It's Jason Cordova. So that's what I got coming up immediately. I also have a podcast called Writer Dojo that I do with Steve Diamond. And so Writer Dojo is basically talk about all this woke stuff. One of the things during that is most writing podcasts, like creative writing podcasts, got woke and went broke, or they got really annoying, and so like they were no longer about how to be a writer or creative stuff. It was all about how not to be a writer and how you weren't allowed to write this, and cultural appropriation is bad and all this crap. So Steve Diamond and I started Writer Dojo just to have fun, and we've been doing that for a year, and it's been a hoot. It's actually doing really well, and a lot of writers are getting a lot out of it. So we're just trying to help create, and it's not political. we're just being writers. And we're both right-wing guys, but that we don't get into the politics on the show. We just get into writing on the show. Trying to help people succeed, basically, and not crush all their dreams. So that's what I've got going on currently right now with book stuff.
So what media are you consuming? Are you reading anything? Is there a franchise or a show you're like, oh, this is my thing, man. I'm really into this right now.
Oh man, okay, that's hard because when you write as much as I do, it kills your reading time because your brain starts to edit. So even if I'm reading a book that I really like, my brain the whole time is like, I see what you did there. That was clever. Or if the book's not perfect, my brain starts moving words around, to make it better. So actually, most of my reading, believe it or not, is usually nonfiction or game books. I'm a role playing gamer. I enjoy the hell out of that. And as far as in media, the last TV show that I just truly loved, I love The Expanse. I just binge watched The Expanse earlier this year.
Yeah, gone too soon.
Yeah, that was such a great show. It was so well constructed. Now that was a show that was real diverse. That show was actually human diversity without being shoehorned in bullcrap. It was just well done. And I actually really like Reacher because that was a throwback to just big 1980s, just shoot the bad guys and get the girl. I love that. Yeah, as far as media that I've been consuming, that's been pretty much it. Like I said, last movie I really liked was Top Gun.
Yeah, it was pretty good. Well, I really enjoyed this interview. Just bringing this up. So if you're LDS, there are a number of people. I think it is odd. I've noticed a lot of sci-fi writers.
Oh yeah,
tend to be Mormon. I don't know why that is. It does seem to be.
I wrote a blog post about that a few years ago because somebody was asking me about it, and because there are a ton. With actually one of the most successful authors in the world right now is Brandon Sanderson.
Yep.
Brandon is he just did a $47 million Kickstarter. Brandon is his own entity. He is orders of magnitude. Like at the last convention I was at, on one panel I introduced myself. I was like the second most famous writer there because Brandon was the first most famous, and so I'm like way down. And so I said, think of me like Brandon Sanderson with $46 million less dollars. No, Brandon's he's not political at all. But no, there are a ton of LDS authors, and my theories about it were multifold. And that for the longest time, well, first off, you got a really well-read population. Mormons read a lot, way disproportionate to the rest of America. We just read, and reading is still encouraged amongst kids, and readers become writers. So when you take a demographic that is like way off way to the right side of the bell curve of reading, that's the first step. Plus, it's not considered nerdy. Utah's the nerdiest state, and so all the fandom stuff is beloved. Every fandom, like we have a Comic-Con that's big as San Diego's big, multinational mega corporation one, but ours is just normal. And so there's that. Then we also had a writing conference here in Utah for about 30 years. It was really good. And we had a couple creative writing teachers at some colleges in Utah, specifically a guy named Dave Wolverton. And his pen name was Dave Farber. He wrote the Rune Lord series. Dave Wolverton, of his students, had, and I'm not one of them, I didn't come from this crowd, but I know of Dave's students, he had something like 200 students become published writers. And of those, and for a college professor, that's astronomical. And he had something like 50 or 60 become New York Times bestsellers. And excuse me. Dave Wolverton was the creative writing instructor at BYU for forever. And like I said, I didn't go to BYU. I went to state, go Aggies. So I didn't come from that. But when you get that many authors concentrated in one culture in one place, you start to get a thing where they all network and know each other. And networking and being a writer is huge. Because it presents a lot of opportunities for writing stuff for different anthologies and collections and just getting your name out there, and a lot of cross promotion. Which is funny though, in the last couple of years, the same community. It still went through all the woke nonsense of everybody else, where we had the bully gatekeepers come into it and try to ruin everything as they did everywhere else. But that's my overall theory of Mormon writerdom. Why there's so dang many Mormon writers.
It's a good theory. It's interesting. I know that's probably not super interesting to most of the people that will might be listening. I was just some of those weird things you kind of notice. It was like, yeah. Because I was like the other day, I was like, Orson Scott Card's out there.
Yeah, Scott Card.
All these other people. Yeah.
He was a pioneer. Scott Card was a big deal. Oh my gosh. Now that was a guy that even predates SAD Puppies as far as canceling, because he was the one that way back in the old days, they really freaked out at him because he was against gay marriage. It was really funny because Orson Scott Card's a Democrat. He is
He's a lefty.
Yeah, big time. And so it's just kind of hilarious. And I've only met him a couple times briefly, and we've never had a chance to talk. But I really respect that guy as a writer and also as a pioneer of the crap that he went through and didn't cave. I mean, he stood up for what he believed in.
They wouldn't let him have this little Superman short story. That was, for whatever reason, that was the bridge too far.
Well, he still gets disinvited from conventions. I saw one where he got disinvited from some con because somebody's like, well, if Orson Scott Card's there, I feel unsafe. And I was like, come on. The dude is like in his 60s. What's he going to do? He's going to jump off the stand and into the audience and randomly attack you? I mean, come on with the unsafe crap, all right? I've collected more death threats than I know what to do with, and they go in a drawer. You know?
And that is a good point. So people don't talk about it. They have to go through cancel culture, whatever you want to call it. How does it affect your personal life? How do you adjust with that? Do you go to a new normal, or how does that work?
Okay, a couple things. What I recommend for people who are creatives that go through this stuff, you're going to piss off liberals. You need to be prepared. Just nuts and bolts here. Okay, so first off, philosophically, if you're not a combative kind of personality, don't, because they're going to eat you alive. Basically, if you're the kind of person, if you're a happy warrior where they can yell at you and you're still going to go about your day and be fine, good. If you're the kind of person that gets emotionally distressed by the criticism of total strangers, don't get into this. Other than that, on a personal level, man, boy, make sure you've got your family ready for this and that your family is okay with it too, because they will come at you so hard and it is so stressful. Anytime I do any sort of event, I always have witnesses. Wherever I go, whatever I do, I always have witnesses with me, because these people lie their asses off. They lie constantly with accusations. One author I know, and I won't name him because he's a good dude, but he's a Democrat and he's kind of an idiot when it comes to politics. He got hashtag Me Too'd during all this, back when the Me Too thing was going on. And being a Democrat, and the thing is, he's a good dude. And as soon as we heard that he had harassed some woman, we were like, what? Everybody who knew this guy, male and female, going back for years, that guy? No, bullcrap. But being a Democrat, his first response was to apologize. And he goes, I don't remember this. I'm really sorry. I don't remember. But if I offended you, I'm so sorry and I apologize. And he threw himself on the mercy of the merciless. And they immediately started to rip him apart, and they're going to ruin his career. And then 24 hours later, the woman who accused him came back and said, yeah, I just made it up. I never met him. I just saw his name on a flyer. And I was so caught up in the moment and passion of the hashtag Me Too movement that I wanted to raise awareness. So I accused this total stranger of sexual harassment. And so it's so funny to me because he's getting ripped apart. And I talked to him afterwards and dude, I freaking told you so. I told you so. You live by the sword, you die by the sword. But if you go to stuff, I record everything I can. If I'm in a place that allows recording stuff, I record it every panel I'm on, I record. Because I've had people, one time I went to Gen Con many years ago, and I was on a bunch of panels, had a great time. And afterwards, this really famous left-wing author gets on Twitter in front of her 100,000 followers, whatever, and goes, I heard a rumor that Larry Correia was rude and racist to a person of color on a panel at Gen Con. And immediately all her little sycophantic, lefties were like, all the little harpies of tolerance were like, oh no, and they shared it everywhere. Like, what a racist. Well, the thing was, every single panel I couldn't think of a thing. I was like, what the hell are they talking about? And in fact, the only author of color that I'd been on a panel with that I could think of is a friend of mine. He's a good dude, and we've worked together, and we get along great. And I had no idea what the hell they're talking about. So I went directly to the author and I responded to her in public on Twitter, and I go, well, that's interesting that you heard this. Let's which panel was it on? Because every single panel I was on at Gen Con was recorded. So let's watch the tape. She immediately blocked, and all her little harpies came in. They're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe he talked to you. You're so brave. That must have been scary. And I was like, yeah, so I record everything. Never, always have a wingman. Anytime you go to anything where these people are there, have a wingman, have a buddy. Any sort of professional capacity, cover your butt. Geez, other than that, man, you will find out real fast who your friends are, and you will find out who has a spine, who doesn't.
That's true. Yeah, I went through a tough experience. I wouldn't necessarily call it camp. It was one of those moments where like, were those people that you had a positive relationship, were they sincere, or was it just for them, they had to and you really do get a sense of people's
Yep.
integrity, what they're worth, what their character is. So
Yeah.
in a way, I guess that is, in some ways, it is a good thing. What do your kids think of you and all this?
Oh,
Do they
man.
do they care what you do? Are they like really invested?
My kids are actually hardcore. Like, we're like hardcore political family, and like my kids are actually really sharp because ever since they were little, we're the family that like we would talk about everything around the dinner table, right? Um, that's just how we are, and we never dumbed anything down for our kids. That's just our nature. And so my wife is very, very super intelligent. But we always raised our kids we also raised our kids to question everything, question us. Just because somebody tells you something doesn't mean it's true. So my kids actually really kind of political, and they're all pretty hardcore. Like my oldest daughter is a published writer now. My oldest daughter Hinkley, she has sold several short stories. Um, she's not as political as I am, but she's still really outspoken about what she believes in. And for a year there, she actually had an idea that, because she's actually a really talented writer, and like her, for how young she is, she's got a really good future ahead of her. Like with some more experience, I think she's really going to kick ass. But she said, I kind of want to get a pin name, like some Rainbow Warrior social justice pin name, and I want to get a rainbow hair wig, and I want to write a bunch of crap that'll appease the horrible people and win a Hugo Award, and then get up there and be accepting my award and take off my rainbow wig and say, I'm Larry Correia's daughter. Ha ha, I fooled you, and then run out. And I was like, honey, I would have to have the car parked ready for you to escape. No, so my kids are actually pretty hardcore. And then I got one daughter. I mean, you're all the I have one daughter on a mission currently in
Nice, congrats.
Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And then my son is leaving here this year. He's a senior. And he is super political because that boy's he's a gun nut. That one is he's a gunsmith. That's what he does for fun. So he's a teenager who builds AR-15s. That's how he stays out of. That's how we kept him out of trouble. Was I just supply him with parts.
That's kind of an intense hobby to have for a young.
Yeah, and the thing is, he's really good. I mean, he's actually very, very, very sharp kid. And then I have a younger boy, and right now he doesn't know. He's young enough. He doesn't get any of this political crap yet. But no, so my family actually is pretty hardcore. Like, people think that I'm like the mean one, the tough one. No, my wife, the lovely Mrs. Correia, like my wife is beautiful and she's awesome, and she's a marathon runner, and all my fans have met her and just think she's the like loveliest, nicest person ever. She is hardcore pro-liberty. My wife loves America, and she takes no crap. So my family has actually had my back the entire time. My daughter, who's on a mission, when she went off to college, it was hilarious. So her roommates were like hippy dippy, pot smoking, and at the time it was ACAB, BLM, fight the power. Trump needs to go to prison. do all your COVID stuff, all the stuff he was back, and that neither one of them had a job. They both lived off their dad, and my daughter is just looking at. I can't stand my roommates; they're driving me nuts, and she's keeping her mouth shut, because she has to live with them. And then one day she's coming home from work because she had a job, and the apartment above hers has the door open, and all the girls are sitting around, and they're listening to Ben Shapiro. And my daughter goes, "Wait a second." So she goes up to the other apartment. She goes, "Hey, I'm from downstairs. Are you guys you're all cool with this?" And they're like, "Oh yeah, we're voting for Trump." And my daughter's like, "Can I hang out with you guys?"
There are more of us. I'm not alone anymore.
From that point on, she hung out with the upstairs apartment because they were like normal. It was just kind of funny, which is funny because like the hippie girls she lived with, their dads were like paying for everything, and they thought they were so snooty because we live in the mountains in the middle of nowhere. And so my daughter told them what town we live in, which I don't like to put out on the internet too much.
Yeah, obviously.
So everybody here in Utah knows where it is. So, and it's a little tiny town in the mountains. And so they just automatically assumed that my daughter was a poor, dumb hick, which is awesome because I'm like this world famous author and we live in this giant mansion on our own giant mountainside. And she's like, yeah, that's me. I'm just a poor, yeah, okay. And she just ran with it, just let him think that she was a poor, dumb hick who'd never done anything or gone anywhere. As I've dragged her around to events all over America since she was a little kid. So yeah, good times.
Sounds fun. What I take away from that, Larry, is actually in your family, at least when it gets to being political, you're actually the one that's the squish. You're the one that's like a little bit like, I don't know, guys. We should get them rich.
I'm actually, believe it or not, the most forgiving. Like dead serious. I'm not even joking there. Like friends of mine that have like tossed me under the bus, like just politically squish. Right. Oh, you're friends with Larry Correia? Oh, well, not really. Later on, like years later, their career's in the toilet, and I would like reach out and try to help them, or I'd like try to hook them up with like behind the scenes, give them, like hook them up with an anthology or send them the way of a publisher who's looking for something, that kind of thing. Whereas my wife is like, nah, burn them.
Let them burn. Well, Larry, this was a lot of fun. I found it fascinating. I'm sure the listeners will too. I learned a lot. You're an interesting guy.
Oh, thanks, Peter.
I love your books. I look forward to what you are writing next. If someone wants to find you online, where should they look?
My blog is monsterhunternation.com. My fan page is over on Facebook. And it's just, if you just search my name, you'll find me over there. Be warned, it's very political. And that's pretty much it. So, and also the Writer Dojo podcast. Those are the best places to find me. My books are available pretty much everywhere books are sold.
Awesome. Well, we thank you for having having you on the show, Larry. And we'll have to try to do it again. This was a lot of fun. Thank you for coming on. I appreciate it.